What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as tools for personal and community growth.
This week, we are finally discussing The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante. This is the second historical fiction novel in Ferrante's Neapolitan quartet. The book follows the adolescence and young adulthood of Elena, her best friend Lila, and their neighbors in a working-class neighborhood in 1960s Naples, Italy. This is originally written in Italian, so we're reading the English translation by Anne Goldstein.
This book is wonderful, but it's also very dark. So just a brief content warning up top. This book includes descriptions of rape, abuse, both physical, sexual, and emotional. So if that is not something you want to read or listen to us discuss today, we'll catch you on the next episode. So we read the first book in this series a bit ago. It was actually the last podcast we recorded in person with a guest before the Panini Press hit. So that was episode 26 where we discussed My Brilliant Friend. That's the book one in this series. So if you want to listen back to that conversation, we had a great time. We had a guest on, Jessica, who shared a lot of her personal love for this book as well as her experience living and studying in Italy, which was really enlightening as well. Yeah, so my experience reading this book, like I said, I took a year off between reading these two books. I wouldn't say it's a beach read, but I definitely read it on a single weekend beach vacation. I came back and Julia was like, "What do you mean you finished it? Weren't you going to like give yourself a month to read that book?" And I'm like, yeah, I gave myself a month, but I finished it in 3 days. I was so sucked into the story. I mean, part of the novel does take place in like a beach setting, but it's pretty dark. I wouldn't say it's the casual beach read you might go for if you're on vacation and want to kind of read something light and fun. But I overall really enjoyed it. I think, yeah, not being able to put it down was my experience to a T for this book.
It was very intimidating. She came back and was like, so I finished it in 4 days and I really want to talk about it right now. And I was like,
Yeah.
You know, not like putting pressure on me, but very much like, I'm so excited. I mean, it's something I do too, where I'm like, have you read it? Have you read it? Have you read it? Because I really want to talk about it with you. And I have been having trouble finishing books during the pandemic, or the panini, as you called it earlier. It's been a lot harder than it used to be. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself that I could do it. And so I put it off and I put it off. We were supposed to do this book ages ago. And I just kept saying no. And then particularly when I didn't finish Pachinko, I was like, oh my gosh, if I can't finish Pachinko, I'm not going to be able to finish this one. It's even bigger. And then I made her wait for like 9 months, but we're finally here. So what I did was, because the chapters aren't like traditional chapters the way we would think of them. They're just like little interludes and the pages just keep going and going. There's no page breaks. But the chapters are really, really short. They're like a page and a half, maybe. And so you really feel like, you're like, oh my gosh, I've read like 20 chapters and it's only been 20 pages, right? But you feel like you're making a lot of progress. So it's very, very encouraging. So I kind of started out slowly. And then once it gets to the beach plot, it really picks up. Like, this book moves. It moves like crazy. Yeah. So much plot happens in this book that you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't stop. It's just one more. It's just one more little chapter. It's just one more. And pretty soon you've read 200 pages and you're like, wow, I'm very impressed with myself. It's so action-packed and it's very fast-paced and you just get sucked in. So yeah, I ended up really loving it and I'm really happy for myself that I figured out how to tackle this book and conquered my fear and now I feel like I can do anything. So yeah, I'm like, we'll do book 3 in 3 years. Make it a running theme. Also, my, like, primary feeling getting to the end of this book is just like, wow, Italians are so dramatic. That's, like, you're just like, wow. The drama. Unreal. It's great.
So in our previous episode discussing My Brilliant Friend, we talked at length about Elena Ferrante, but I'll give you a few things to know about this author. So the first is that we don't actually know who the author is. Elena Ferrante is the author's pseudonym. What we do know, at least is what the publisher has shared, is that she's Italian and she's a woman. That's all we know, factually. There's a lot of, people who have done like research and tried to like pick apart based on writing style who might this person be, which feels very invasive. Like this person just wants to write books and like keep their anonymity, like let them be. I'm curious, like if the author ever dies, like if they have anything in their like will or estate. Not if they ever die, when they die. Are they immortal? If they would then release information about who they are, or if they will like keep the secret to their grave and never identify themselves. I don't know. But the author has written several novels, including many that have been adapted to the screen. My Brilliant Friend is a show on HBO. There's 2 seasons out that cover the first 2 books in the quartet. I have watched the first 2 episodes of season 1. Like the books, it's really dark, and I tend to watch more lighthearted TV and read more dark books, so I haven't watched the show. Did you watch the 2nd season?
I'm not done.
Okay.
But I have started it. It came out during the pandemic, and it felt too dark to watch. Yeah. And so I
think that was part of it. It's like I was like sad and depressed and laying on my bed, and I watched like 2 episodes, and I'm like, well, now I'm just sadder and more depressed. Because life is hard now, but life was even harder for these 1950s Neapolitan families.
Yeah. I watched season 1 when it came out, and then season 2 came out in 2020, and so I was like, can't do that. But I'm watching it now.
So Ferrante has not only written a lot, but also won a lot of awards and been named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2016. The 4th and final book in the series, the book is called The Story of the Lost Child, was shortlisted for the Man Booker International Prize. So the critical acclaim, public appeal, winning TV deals to, the person behind Elena Ferrante is doing well. We've also said this before when we read My Brilliant Friend, but if you have a copy of the original US printings of these books, please don't judge the book by its cover. I don't know who picked the covers for these original printings. You would think they were released. I thought this was an older book, but it was released in like the last 10, 15 years. Yeah. And the cover is like a cheesy 90s romance looking cover, especially because book 1 is like Leela and Stefano at their wedding, which is literally the last part of the book. The whole thing's about their childhood, and the cover makes you think it's about, like...
an 80s wedding.
Yeah. They're not light reads by any means. They're very much not romance novels, though topics of love, sex, and relationships are explored at length. Like, there aren't HOAs everywhere. Happily ever after is like, no, that's not what's happening here. There are, since then, they've published other covers that, I think look a lot more interesting and more accurate to the book. It's like a picture of a woman from like the 1950s or 60s, or styled to look that way. Maybe it's a model that they've, did a photo shoot with for this book. But yeah, it like puts you in the time and also looks interesting.
Yeah.
Instead of just like, what the heck is this book?
I mean, we complained for a long time about the covers in the last episode, so I won't say too much more. But whoever chose those pictures, I hope that they were given a different role in the company, because...
I like that you're so nice. You're like, I don't want them fired. I don't want them to, never work in publishing again. I just think they should be better suited to some other work.
They probably have some other strengths in other areas. Maybe they could do the covers of romance novels. Or maybe they just picked the wrong person. Maybe they picked the romance cover person. And they were like, this is all I know how to do, guys. And it was just the wrong thing. Maybe it's not their fault.
I do really enjoy on the original cover is 2 like reviews, and one is from John Freeman at The Australian. His review is, imagine if Jane Austen got angry, and you'll have some idea of how explosive these works are. I think that's pretty on point.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Honestly, that review is what convinced me that this book must not be crap, because I'm like, I want to read an angry Jane Austen. I don't know what's going on with this cover, but I want to read an angry Jane Austen.
Yeah. Even, okay, I know we said we wouldn't spend much time on it, and now we're ranting about it, but the Story of a New Name's cover, like, I don't even know which characters they're trying to represent.
Right.
Like, it looks like perhaps a man and a woman, but maybe not. They're kind of, like, gender ambiguous. You see them from the back of their heads. Is it Leela with Stefano, or Enzo, or Nino, or is it Elena with what's his face that she gets engaged to at the end? Pietro? I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. It doesn't tell us anything.
These covers. Well, I think we've buttered that bread. I think we can move on. So, it is now my task to summarize this absolute giant of a book. A lot happens in this novel. I will be as succinct as I can. As we said, this is part 2 of Ferrante's Neapolitan series, and it picks up immediately where the first book left off. Like, immediately.
Like, you feel like she wrote and just kept writing, and then her publisher was like, we have to split these at some point. And she's like, sure, fine, right here. Just chop it off, and we'll start publishing on the next sentence.
Genuinely, it's like the next second. So we're at Leela's wedding when she discovers that her new husband has, like, made a deal to work with her sworn enemy, the kind of gangster family of the neighborhood, and Leela married this guy specifically so she wouldn't be tied to them, and then they show up wearing these shoes she designed. It's a whole thing. So then, once Leela's married, her and Elena's lives continue to diverge a lot, because Elena finishes high school, and Leela tries to survive in the very violent and cutthroat world that she has married into, that she didn't fully anticipate, I think. But their paths intersect for one summer when Leela is advised to go to the coast for her health after a miscarriage. And Elena hopes to rekindle her summer dalliance of sorts with Nino Sarratorre, the nerdy boy who actually is willing to, like, talk to her about serious topics and who she kissed last summer. However, the drama during their stay, Nino and Leela, the married one, are the ones who fall in love and begin an affair, which Elena then has to help cover up. She's super pissed about this, of course. And so she kind of cuts ties with the neighborhood and with Leela for a long time and ends up going to college in Pisa. And she's becoming all fancy, and she ends up publishing a book by the end. Whereas Leela's life is like pure chaos. She gets pregnant with Nino, but they break up. So then she makes do with her husband for a while, raising her kid. And during this process, Leela gives Elena a box of notebooks about her life up until this point, because she doesn't want her husband to find them. So this gives Elena a lot of insight into Leela's thoughts and experiences while they're separated. And then Elena's very frustrated by all this, and then ends up dumping them in the river when she gets back to college, after she reads them. And then the dark horse hero of the story is a dude named Enzo, who we have heard almost nothing about the entire book. He was in the military.
Off in the military for most of it.
Most of the book. He, like, shows up and, like, suddenly hates everything around him except Leela. And he kind of swoops in and takes in Leela and her son, like, no strings attached. Is just like, I want you to be free and safe. I will raise this child who is not my son. Amazing guy. I'm like, where have you been? The very last chapter, she's published her book. She's done the thing. She's at a book reading. And lo and behold, who should show up but the devil himself, evil incarnate, Nino Sarratorre. And then, whew, cut to black. Cliffhanger. And you're like, oh my gosh, I guess I gotta read the next one.
Does it open in the next second?
Probably.
Like this one did? Yeah.
I want to know now.
I think it's a pretty good summary. I think you did well. There's so much in there.
I left out so many characters and so many side plots, but I'm just like, this is what it's about.
Yeah, basically, like, every character that we met in book 1 who was a child is now a teenager / young adult, and like, it likely was engaged or is engaged at some point in the novel.
Oh, they're all sleeping with each other. It's like it's like Friends, but Naples version.
Yeah, if they are engaged to someone, they might be sleeping with someone else. Like, even Enzo had a fiance, like, while he's gone. But then when he comes back, they realize they don't really have anything there, and he just dumps her, yeah.
He becomes very, like, I mean, he's very upfront about everything. He doesn't, like, string her along, but he becomes very, like, disenfranchised with the world. And he's like, Leela's the only one who understands. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I've loved you my whole life. And you're like, bro, where were you? We could have saved a lot of trouble. But he wasn't the exciting option when she was young. So maybe she wouldn't have looked his way. I don't know.
This podcast is made possible by our wonderful book club members. You can support the show by becoming a member on buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. So Julie and I are readers. We like to talk about books, but we're also writers. And so with our book club members, we love to share newsletters of things happening in our personal lives, as well as essays, poetry, other things we're writing. So starting at $3 per month, book club members can connect with fellow listeners, help us select books for future episodes, unlock exclusive newsletters, poems, etc. that we write, and get early and discounted access to future events. If you want to take your support to the next level, you can also join the TISM tier, which starts at $5 per month. The TISM tier is all about autism. Are you an autistic person looking for community, a possible neurodiverse person looking for resources, or an ally hoping to learn from an actually autistic person? Members of this tier get access free to Julia's autism-related articles on Medium. The best part of any book club, besides the books, is the community. So join us in our growing community of book nerds by becoming a member of the book club today. You can follow the link in our show notes or go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to join the party. Now back to the books. So first, let's get into... I don't even know how we're framing this episode. So we enjoyed a lot of things about it. And there's 3 separate yet probably related things we want to talk about.
Yeah.
One is Elena Ferrante's writing style and how she structures this book.
Yeah. I mean, she's just such a good writer. I haven't really read anything quite like her. And we also do have to give props to her translator because there's a lot that is tricky with changes in dialect and all that kind of stuff that she navigates very, very expertly. But yeah, Ferrante's so good. And one of the things that I find really fascinating about what she does is the way that she writes dialogue. She sort of has 2 modes. So one is this kind of back and forth without the he said, she said, or any extra details about movement or anything. It's just a back and forth of like, quote, 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 and you just have to like follow along. And it's really short statements. Or she has this one like giant paragraph that takes up like 1 or 2 pages of, sometimes it's one person monologuing or sometimes it's a couple people. And it sort of mimics that experience of like listening and kind of being swept up into this kind of, essentially a monologue. And it's sort of in summary and it's sort of free and direct discourse, which is where the author takes on the style of speech of another person who's speaking without using quotation marks, which Jane Austen kind of popularized. Like, there's this one scene where Elena's at a party with a bunch of her, like, school chums. Like, they all know a lot more about politics than her because their parents do. So they get into this dialogue that she isn't really participating in. And so some of it is, like, following the kind of back and forth. And then some of it is just, like, a list of topics. So, like, the wrong direction taken by France, by Italy, opening to the left, Saragat, Nenni, Fanfani in London, Macmillan, the Christian Democratic Congress in our city, the followers of Fanfani, Moro, the Christian Democratic left. The socialists have ended up in the jaws of power. We will be communists. We, with our proletariat and our parliamentarians, to get the laws of the center-left passed. If it goes like that, a Marxist-Leninist party will become a social democracy. Did you see how Leone behaved at the start of the academic year? So she's just like, it's like a list of dun, da, dun, da, dun, da, dun, and it's sort of this back and forth without any indication of who's talking or kind of time or where we are. And then she'll pull you right back out by inserting some pronouns, right? So it'll switch back to the first person I of Elena's point of view so that we're back in her eyeballs, essentially, seeing the conversation again. And then we go back into her head and her thoughts, and it kind of takes us out of the conversation. And it's amazing that you can follow it. That's the thing that I find so impressive, is you can tell, you kind of have the experience of what it feels like to be in this kind of sweeping conversation that you can't quite follow, just you're kind of barely hanging on, you know? And she navigates it so expertly, and it's really wild to me how well it works, because it's just a block of text.
Yeah, it's so well done. I think, to your point, as far as like, you pretty much always know where you're at. Like, I don't remember reading this and feeling like confused. I think there was a couple times I sometimes fall in like, when there's like multiple lines of dialogue back and forth, I'm like, wait, who's speaking? And to like go back and like mentally alternate to understand, you know, who's there. But like, otherwise it flows so seamlessly in and out of action as it's happening. And Elena's thoughts on it in real time, and as the like narrator who's writing this story, because it's like a book within a book, because Elena is telling you this story from her older age, in like her 60s is when she's writing this. We get that original frame in book 1, and then we don't really address it again except occasionally when she pulls you back, and when she can summarize a time, or like thinking back, I recognize, like, I mean, she never really gets as explicit as that, but you can feel when she's pulling back to, like, she's reflecting on this from, like, 50 years in the future versus, like, in the moment. I don't know. That balance back and forth between, like, the younger and older Elena, the one who's writing it, the one who's living it, is, like, so interesting.
Yeah. There are certain moments where she makes decisions, and the way that her feelings are described is kind of judgy, and you're kind of like, okay, I think this is her older self kind of criticizing her younger self, or not being a bit harsh, but still being honest of like, this is exactly what I was feeling. You know, she doesn't cover anything up. And she'll be honest with you from her older self of like, this is something that I know now, but I didn't know at the time.
Yeah, it makes my mind boggle to think of Ferrante, the author, writing a narrator who's writing a story, but talking about it in a very present, like 16, 18, 20-year-old Elena's emotions. Like, oh, it's very masterfully done, that you can just like dive in, and until you take a step back and think like, oh wow, how did she do that? As a writer is fascinating.
That's what it makes me. I'm sure so many people have speculated about this, but like the fact that she uses a pseudonym, and the pseudonym's first name is the same name as the main character, and it's written in this way of like an older woman reflecting back on her younger self. It feels so autobiographical, and I don't know if like she used a pseudonym so that people just think it's her and it's not her, or if she used a pseudonym so that people don't know who she is, you know? But
yeah, I see that, because like the pseudonym can either reinforce this fictional Elena who's 60 years old writing the story of her friend's life, and like that's really fascinating. But I could also see it like, if you are truly writing about your, like, these are very intimate details, and whether some are real and some are fake, like, it's unknown. And even though she's writing it like as fiction, like, it would still be a lot to like get your personal life dug into, and or for even people in your own life to like speculate like, oh, am I this character in your novel? Like, when she's writing these very intimate portrayals of life. Fascinating. I think ultimately though, like, if you're feeling a little lost with all the plot and who's talking when, like, the main essential story is one of friendship. So we do actually speed past a lot of Elena's personal life and times in Leela's life when Elena's not around. Like, there's just like gaps. Like, it'll just jump forward 6 months or 8 months or a year to the next time they see each other, or their lives intersect in some way. And there's kind of this frame that really helps the story along, because there's so much of their life that they don't share with each other in real time, is that Leela has given Elena all these journals. So you get details of like how awful her wedding night was, because even though she never said it to Elena, she can read about it.
Yeah, and you're really grateful for the journals, because I realize this is a fictional Elena talking about her fictional childhood self, and anyway. But like, young Elena is so bad at reading Leela and knowing why she does things. She's so bad at it. But then, because we have these journals, because we're writing from this later in life perspective, we can get Leela's point of view as well, and why she does the things she does, and like how she feels, and so it becomes a more balanced portrayal, because otherwise I would feel like it would be a completely different story if we didn't have that perspective.
And I think there's, like, again, going back to, like, the masterfulness of Ferrante's writing, there's a moment where Leela and Elena are talking about kind of how Leela is being used by her family. They want her to, like, design more shoes to make more money, and kind of, like, force, like, not asking what she wants, but just, like, telling her to do things. And Leela kind of explains that she was so proud of the first pair of shoes because it, like, proved that she was, like, worth something, even though she didn't continue school.
Mm-hmm.
And Elena's, like, at the time, like, flabbergasted, like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, I was always competing with you. I didn't realize you were competing with me. But I'm like, no, Elena, it was so obvious the whole time.
Yeah.
That Leela was, like, also feeling like she had to prove herself and, like, competitive, and, like, that's why she was always sometimes mean to you, because, like, you had what she wanted. Yeah, it's interesting that we can feel so close to Elena as the character, the young Elena, but at the same time, older Elena, the narrator voice, is giving enough hints into who these characters are and how their relationships unfold, what they think of each other, that we can kind of, like, have a little more perspective. I feel that a lot with Nino, but we'll get into that too.
Oh my God. Yeah. Sometimes you just want to shake them and be like, just talk to each other.
Right, yeah.
You could be each other's greatest ally, but instead you're both jealous of the other person and you never talk about it, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah. I found chapter 84 really beautifully written, kind of, like, giving a nod to this idea of Elena's world is, like, ever expanding, and she's, like, constantly, like, going new places and learning new things, and how even though she's in new places, and at this time had been, like, a long time since she'd been around Leela, she was reflecting on how much her childhood friendships and the place she grew up, like, influenced her words and her actions and her choices even when she was far from home. Like, she's trying to make her way through university and, like, kind of own who she is, coming from, like, a working class background, but also wants to fit in and kind of dealing with that. And she even reflects, like, even though in my tidy imagination, this story of my life in university is so separate from the story of Leela, they're actually, like, so intertwined. Like, would I have stood up for myself in those ways if I hadn't been influenced by Leela, if I wasn't thinking about her and how she would speak when I was speaking up for myself? I thought that was really wonderful. She uses this airport baggage claim analogy to help explain it too, that really stuck with me as far as, like, right, like, the story we tell ourselves that we line up in a nice little row. Sure, you can make it look nice and pretty, but, like, the real story is a lot more messy and a lot more intertwined.
Yeah, I loved that acknowledgement of how much they had influenced each other. And you see, I mean, I think Leela admits to Elena more often how Elena is, like, an influence on her. In certain moments where she's like, oh, I did what you would have done, or what I think you would have done. Like, they each have this impression of the other as having all the qualities that they lack, but they then draw those things, they draw that inspiration from each other and to start to take on those qualities kind of without realizing it. And so it's her reflecting back on it and being like, oh yeah, she was a huge influence on how I moved through the world. Like, you can't separate that kind of person out of you.
Another kind of through line on top of this idea of friendship between Leela and Elena that we see is kind of an examination of womanhood and returning consistently to bodies. Julie, I think you said when we were prepping, you're like, I could write a whole essay just on this.
Yeah.
And oppression of the female body specifically in their neighborhood and in their relationships. In some ways, it's a coming of age story for Elena and the other woman in her neighborhood. And I think one of the biggest moments we see that is when she kind of recognizes the woman around her that she always saw as kind of, like, other and older. And she kind of, like, puts herself like, oh, they're not that much older than me. Like, we're actually very close. Like, in a way, like, I am them and they are me. Like, there's a much more, like, leveling and connection point with other women in this versus in the first book where she's still very much like a child and sees herself as separate than these other women around her.
And she starts to piece it together, the toll that their society, you know, the immediate threats of their neighborhood and the bigger picture political things, the toll that all takes on women's bodies and how that's where she's headed and that it has already affected her in certain ways. There's this gorgeous chapter. I want to read the whole thing, but we can't. Where it's just like one long paragraph where she like is having all these realizations, where the sort of quote unquote hysterical woman, the crazy woman, gotta have one in every single good piece of feminist literature for symbolism. She like disappears because she thinks she sees her old lover, and she disappears and they find her in this gross pond. And it like really stirs up a lot of emotions for everyone in the neighborhood. And so then Elena's having these thoughts. Let me see. This is the quote you pulled. I'm going to trust you. The only woman's body I had studied with ever-increasing apprehension was the lame body of my mother, and I had felt pressed, threatened by that image, and still feared that it would suddenly impose itself upon mine. That day, instead, I saw clearly the mothers of the old neighborhood. They were nervous, they were acquiescent, they were silent with tight lips and stooping shoulders, or they yelled terrible insults at the children who harassed them. Extremely thin, with hollow eyes and cheeks, or with broad behinds, swollen ankles, heavy chests, they lugged shopping bags and small children who clung to their skirts and wanted to be picked up. And good God, they were 10, at most 20 years older than me. Yet they appeared to have lost those feminine qualities that were so important to us girls. They had been consumed by the bodies of husbands, fathers, brothers, whom they ultimately came to resemble because of their labors or the arrival of old age, illness.
One thing that always, that stood out to me here is this idea of, there's always more kids around.
Mm-hmm.
Elena's world is just, her and the other kids that are, right around her age. But everyone's got so many younger siblings. Everyone has a mother. And we get a few of the mothers here or there. And they're always, she does, as she describes them here, they're kind of, nervous, acquiescent, silent. They aren't real active characters. Even when they go to the beach, they're with Leela's mother. And we hardly get anything from her.
Yeah, she doesn't go anywhere. She stays
at the house all day. Yeah.
And just cleans it because she's so anxious about being away and doesn't quite know what to do with herself. She doesn't know how to have a holiday. One of the examples you see in this quote that I pulled, and the example that's the most prominent from the first book as well, is Elena's mother has a limp, and it continues throughout this book. She has this kind of fear of becoming her mother and kind of being weighed down and crippled by her neighborhood and being stuck and dependent on someone else. And so her mother's limp is a kind of symbol of a shackle almost. And that kind of did the disfigurement that comes from all the oppression around her and the violence. Though it is interesting, her mother makes a trek all the way out to her in Pisa. And Ellen is very frustrated by it in the moment, but later is really emotional about it. And that felt like kind of a turning point for me, of seeing her mother have some determination and some freedom and have something to hold on to. Even her mother who has a limp is not completely tied down yet.
And I'm curious too of the silence we hear from these women, or the oxymoron of that silence we hear. The silence we observe of these women is because Elena is our narrator. Elena doesn't see or hear her mother except when her mother is nagging her or frustrating her or holding her back from opportunities, instead of perhaps a more generous read of her mother is nervous. Her oldest daughter is really smart and she wants her to do well but doesn't want her to get disappointed. So she's always kind of measured of you may not be able to do that. We'll see. You have to make it happen. Kind of putting it all on her. But then she's also so proud of her daughter. And the moment which you see her come to Pisa while Elena is sick during the holidays and all by herself, it kind of feels like a very relatable experience of when you get to college or young adulthood, or maybe some people might experience this earlier, but you realize oh, my parents are their own people. Mm-hmm. They have their own lives before me as a child and kind of developing that friendship bond in addition to a mother-child relationship. For me, that also happened during college years as well. Mm-hmm. So that resonated with me.
Yeah, she's so proud of her, but she doesn't know how to verbalize it. So she just talks about how poorly all the other girls are doing.
Yeah.
And Elena finally clicks. She's oh, this is her trying to say you're doing really well, kind of. Yeah, it's great.
So we mentioned in the overview that Leela is in a difficult abusive marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and she gets pregnant by someone else who's not her husband. And so you have a lot of these body conversations are around Leela's body, because Elena observes bruising. Leela pushes it off as like, won't really talk about it or say like, oh, like it's no big deal, but it's pretty understood. It's physical abuse from Stefano. When she's pregnant, I feel like there's a lot of, I'm trying to remember exactly, but like descriptions of how she like touches her body and like how she feels about being pregnant.
She really hates it.
Yeah.
She's like terrified. Something that comes up in the previous book and this book, she's terrified of things losing their margins, of things losing their solidness. And so she's constantly terrified that she's just going to swell up like a balloon and like explode.
Yeah.
And it feels like this foreign object in her body, and it feels kind of invasive. And yeah, she's always like touching herself as if she's like not sure it's real.
And I think one of the most, so we have these moments of Layla's physical body being kind of objectified or abused. And then we also, like, there's a very explicit symbol of her body being objectified in this painting that's put up in the shoe store.
Once I realized what it meant, I really liked that whole plotline, because basically there's a picture of Leela in her wedding dress in these shoes that they feel like they can use to sell shoes, right? So they are going to use her image, her body, to sell things, which is a very clear women as property, all that kind of stuff, right? Commodifying, etc. And there's this big fight, like this ongoing fight between the guys with the money, who are gross, who want to put Leela's picture up. They want to blow it up real big and put it in the store because they think it'll help sell shoes. And then Leela's husband and brother, who are like trying to possess her in a different way by not letting them put the picture up. And Leela resolves it by sort of disfiguring herself. She turns her own picture into like modern art. So she takes Elena and a bunch of like paper and scissors and different colored paints and stuff, and she sort of puts these stripes over it so that it covers up her face, most of her face and some of her body, so that you see like one of her eyes and the shoes are highlighted. And so there's a sort of these black lines over the picture. And then what's left, they put these sort of different colors sort of highlighting it. And so it becomes this kind of pop art thing.
Yeah, it's like a shoe and a leg and an eye and like a female figure. And while it seems even more so just removing her from it, you could read it as like, oh, even more objectified. She's just a collection of body parts now. But since Leela is the one doing it, it almost feels like she has this very like creative moment to take ownership of it.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the way it's gonna go down, she's gonna control it.
Yeah. Like if I'm gonna use my body for this, I want it to be on my terms, and I want it to look the way I want. I want it to be artistic. I want it to be cool. I want it to be edgy, right? But also she has, at that time, has this kind of self-destructive, she kind of wants people to be angry with her too, and she kind of wants to she wants something to end, and she doesn't know how to get out of the situation that she's in. And so it's also a way of kind of enacting that on herself and getting everyone else to see what's going on in her head, in a way. Because Elena gets it. I don't know if anyone else gets it. But Elena's like, oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, it's a really fascinating sort of, because it demonstrates her like street smarts of being able to navigate multiple people's expectations and somehow get out of it relatively unscathed, but then also expressing herself and how smart she is and just how much there is inside of her that's kind of bursting to get out. And yeah, it's a cool moment.
And then to continue the symbolism, the painting bursts into flames one day.
Oh, yes.
During an argument and completely burns up. And then there's like, gossip going around. It's very likely that, this other woman who worked at the store who always fidgets with her lighter probably accidentally hit it or maybe intentionally hit it and it burst into flames. But then the woman was like embarrassed. And so she's spreading all these rumors that like it just burst into flames on its own. Like,
she's a witch.
She's a witch. She's a witch. She's a devil. Her own painting is going to burst into flames with no other cause. And when she and Elena are discussing the painting burning, Leela says, You see, with Stefano, I behave the way I did with you. I act like this with everyone. I'm Beauty and the Beast, good and evil. And I wrote that down. I was like, that was good. You realize, like, Leela, from Elena's point of view, Leela, like, knows who she is, but then absolutely doesn't know who she is. She's like,
Yeah.
holds on to one thing, but, like, is gonna let it go. You know, like, the shoes were her thing, and then, like, no, like, I don't feel like I have any more inspiration. Like, I don't want to make shoes anymore. She has these bursts of creative energy, like in the book she wrote as a kid, the shoes she designed, the painting she created, and all of them feel like the last thing ever. They don't turn into anything else except more pain and hardship for her. She wrote this beautiful book, but then her teacher never said anything about it because she was, like, mad that Leela dropped out of school, even though it wasn't her choice. Like, she designs these shoes, but it turns into this huge ordeal with her family and her husband and the Soleros, and, like, she doesn't want anything to do with it anymore. And, like, she creates this painting and then it burns up. It's really fascinating. She's, like, kind of this character of duality, Beauty and the Beast, good and evil. And she sees it in herself and she feels it that way too.
Mm-hmm.
She recognizes that she's like, I'm kind of a monster, but I'm also, like, not. I don't know who I am.
Yeah, well, because she's too much for the neighborhood to handle, you know? Like, you see, I feel like everyone, even Elena, puts things on her because they can't deal with the fact that that Leela is smarter than them, or better at something than them, or more creative than them, or prettier than them, or just exists and has opinions and is more strong-willed and so is therefore more successful than them, or whatever. And that's not Leela's fault, you know? But everyone sort of demonizes her. And I think she believes that in a lot of ways because of a lot of the feedback that she gets from other people. She really believes that there's something wrong with her, when actually she's just kind of too much for the neighborhood. Like, if she had a way to channel her genius and people didn't immediately rip it to shreds and say that she was evil, then, like, who knows what person she would be.
And that seems like so much of the through line of these books is that Elena realized, like, she's known for a long time, like, there's some ways that Leela's smarter than me and better at this than me, and, like, what would her life have been? I feel like she constantly comes back to this idea of, like, what would her life have been if she had the opportunities I did? Like, if she was the one who went to school, if she was the one who was able to wait until later in life to get married, and even then later in life, like, Elena's, like, in her early 20s when she gets engaged. It's not like she waited that long, but I mean, she wasn't a teenager like Leela was. Well, we have one more character that we have barely scratched the surface with to discuss.
Yeah, speaking of something where, like, a major point of comparison between the two girls. Nino Sarratorre.
So both of the women, Leela and Elena, think they love him, but our hypothesis, our thesis, they are using him as a means to validate something in themselves. Two different people, two different relationships. He keeps coming back, but dang, do we not like him.
He is the actual worst. This is one of the things where you see older Elena being judgy on her younger self, because the way that older Elena describes Nino is she makes him sound like an asshole. But then she'll say, but this is what I was feeling. This is how I responded. So he'll do something, like, he'll be talking about something that to try and make himself sound clever, right? And then Elena will bring up something and realize that he doesn't know anything about it. And so he'll just be silent and kind of sulk. And then bring up something else he knows a lot about and just completely ignore the thing that she wanted to talk about. Very, very asshole move, right? Very, I am an insecure teenage boy. And Elena will then just twist the whole narrative in some way to make it seem like he's the best thing since sliced bread. And you're just like, girl, get away from him. But she can't, because he's like the person who validates her intellect, right? He's someone from the neighborhood who made it out, who's really smart, who acknowledges her existence and makes her feel like she has valid ideas and thoughts and can keep going and, like, study at university and be successful and all that kind of thing. And so she's sort of feeding off of that from him and really craves his approval more than anything. And there was this one quote where I was like, okay, this explains it. So she's talking to Leela about Nino's life. And she's just like, oh my gosh, he's the coolest. And she says, imagine if you and I could do things like that. travel, work as waiters to support ourselves, learn to speak English better than the English. Why can he be free to do that and we can't? And you're just like, Elena, you want to be him. You don't want to date him. You want to be him.
Yeah. But I mean, it makes sense. Like in their world at this time, you know, like those opportunities weren't available to them.
Right.
And so like those opportunities could be available if you were with a man who could provide them or open doors for you, which ends up being what Elena does.
Mm-hmm.
Like when she gets engaged to Pietro, he is a serious student. He's a great guy. It seems like he's decent, but also he has connections.
Mm-hmm.
He's got money. His mother is the one who takes Elena's novel to a publisher and opens all these doors for her that if they were just friends at university may not have happened. Like it took being in a romantic relationship with someone of privilege and power to open doors for her life. Not that she wasn't already working towards a lot of those things. Like she got into university on her own testing abilities and wrote the novel to get it to the publisher. But it's kind of a testament to who you know, who you date in this world.
Yeah, for sure.
So Leela also is in love with Nino.
She isn't at first. She keeps saying he's ugly. And then they go to the beach, and at a certain point, she falls in love with him.
And it makes you wonder, too, like, again, is she in love with him or who she thinks she is because of him?
Mm-hmm.
Or what he can provide for her? She's very sexually attracted to him and kind of starts the affair with both the intellectual, like, banter that the three of them have together, but also their physical connection through swimming and being on the beach together, and then eventually, like, staying over at his place and lying to her mother about where she's at.
Yeah. I feel like because he's like her first positive sexual experience, fair to say. He like helps her reconnect with her body again, makes her feel alive in herself in a lot of ways, and feel like she has something of value in her brain. And because he has always been in love with her. It seems to be a theme of the book. Said all the boys. I'm like, I've always been in love with you, but you were too good for me, because they're dramatic. So when Leela brings up something that Nino doesn't know, he immediately is like, oh my gosh, I need to read that, starts asking questions. He's like, I need to impress her. So he validates a lot of her thoughts in a way that he doesn't with Elena, but I think really provides her a way to like reconnect with her body. She literally has his child. And like years later, she says, I don't remember anything about Nino. And yet it seemed to me that I loved him more than myself. It doesn't even interest me to know what happened to him, where he went. Right? So, like, it wasn't really about him.
Yeah, it is fascinating later on when she says that, like, I don't remember anything about him. Because they go off and have, like, this, they start to have this little life together. And he's just, like, overburdened by her. And it does not last very long. And a character who we have not even talked about, Antonio, is the one who goes and finds Leela. And kind of like threatens Nino, being like, you better never show your face again.
But then Enzo is the one who goes and gets her. Antonio's the one who finds them.
Right. Yeah, finds them.
And then Enzo is like, I'll go talk to her. And he basically says like, hey, your husband can protect you, but if he's going to hurt you because of what you did, you just let me know and I'll take you in and we'll go somewhere. He makes kind of a little deal with her, which is very sweet.
So at the end, we have, you know, Enzo and Leela living together. They're very poor. Leela is working in like a meat factory. Again, if you want to get into like bodies and life and death. Yeah, so Elena goes to see her when she gets her novel published, like very explicitly to go gloat and like brag. But she doesn't really end up talking about it because she sees Leela's life and how hard it is, but in some ways how Leela seems in some way fulfilled. Mm-hmm. You know, she's doing things on her terms. She has an intellectually interesting relationship with Enzo, who is very respectful of her, cares for her son with her. So I'm really curious in the next two books what comes of their relationship and what happens with Elena, with her running into Nino at this, you know, high point in her life when she's publishing a book, engaged to get married. Is Nino going to throw everything off the tracks?
If she leaves her engagement for him, I will personally jump inside this book and slap her. I mean, not that she's in love with this guy. Like, she could do better. But Nino is not better. Nino is worse. Yeah.
So tune in a year and a half,
Yeah.
whenever we get to that book. We'll talk about book 3.
Okay,
Recommendations.
recommendations.
Mine is really simple. If you liked this book, you should just go read the rest of them. Plus, Ferrante has a new book out. She released another book this year. That's not in this
wow.
quartet. She's still writing stuff. So there's a whole catalog of novels to check out if you like her writing style.
Yeah. We've already touched upon the TV series, but I would recommend it. It is a very excellent adaptation, and I find it very helpful because it helps me visualize the characters. Because their names get really mixed up and there's so many people. And so if you have a visual, it's very helpful. So like early on when I was reading this book, I watched like the first 2 episodes of season 2 just so I could like see them. And then I would also recommend Night and Day by Virginia Woolf and Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And then things that are bringing us joy.
Here comes Julia's next 30-minute segment of this episode. I saw what you have written to talk about. That's why I wrote one. My current obsessed is the book Mythos by Stephen Fry. It's wonderful. It's about Greek mythology. It's like a chronology exploration, plus some little nuggets if you love etymology and how the English language has derived from Greek mythology. It's great.
Yeah.
Now to Julia.
So, while I was editing our episode on Take a Hint, Danny Brown, our guest, Chelsea, recommended this book multiple times called Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, just sung its praises over and over again. And I finished editing this episode and I was like, I gotta read this book. I think it sounds like right up my alley. I got the Kindle version. I sat down. I read the whole thing in 7 hours. And I literally have since then ordered the paper copy, and it just arrived today, and I'm very excited. I think I'm going to read it again right now.
I didn't realize you bought it. Yeah. Twice. You bought it twice.
I bought it twice. I love this book, you guys. Yeah, it's definitely become my new special interest, aka like my personality for the next 3 months. And it's a fat book, so I'm like very impressed with myself that I read it so fast. I probably skipped over things. So I'm curious to see, if I read it again, what I missed. So my eyes just jump over details if I'm not interested. But anyway, it's a romance novel, which you're probably all very surprised, but just the tone of it is so snarky and it has this really large overarching plot, which I really liked. It's not like quaint and small. Basically, the first son of the United States, so like the son of the president who's graduating college, and the second prince of England, Henry, think they hate each other, but they actually have big fat crushes on each other and they fall in love. And it gets a little complicated because they're, parents are leaders of the free world and shit. So it deals with some really like heavy stuff, but there's also like such amazing friendship. Like they form this little crew around them of like just the best people. All the secondary characters are amazing, and they write these emails to each other that just make any literary geek so happy. So many literary references. Because the one character, Henry, it was an English major. Anyway, it's good. It takes you for a ride. I definitely cried once. It's beautiful. So
I can't wait to read it. I need to go place a hold on it or go buy it twice.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I've sent Victoria some choice quotes, so I'm sure I've spoiled too much of it already. But I told several friends about it because I need someone to read it, because when I have a special interest that's this all-consuming, I can't like function properly because I'm like, I need to be thinking about this and reading about this and learning more about the author and their other books, and I need to listen to podcasts that talk about this book, and it's just all I can think about, and I need to be consuming it all the time. And so I found a way to trick myself into going about my daily life. Basically, I make a playlist that walks me through the emotional journey of the book or the TV show or the film or whatever it is that I'm currently obsessed with. And I listen to it while I'm doing other stuff. And it makes my heart happy enough. It tricks me into thinking that it's experiencing the book, and then I can like go cook dinner. And I need someone to read this book so they can appreciate how incredible this playlist is that I've made.
Okay, so I feel like I need to go read it, and then we swap out the last book of this season with that, because I just don't know what you're going to do. I feel like, and then we can just link the playlist to everyone. It'll be great. Okay, I gotta go, friends. I gotta go read a book.
Yeah.
Quick, go read it.
I just got very excited.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at BookClubWithJB, on our website, bookclubwithjb.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Febland. Until next time, happy reading.